Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, everyone, depending on where you are joining us from today. And welcome to the last day of the Global MedTech Regulatory Trends Virtual Summit. If you have missed any of the previous sessions, no worries. You can watch the recordings on demand after today's presentation. Before we get excited for our panel today about navigating Apac regulations, a few quick housekeeping items. This session is recorded, so as mentioned, you will be able to access the recording and any of the slides that are shared. I don't think we have any for today, so you can absolutely access the recording on the Virtual Summit website following the event. For those of you who would like proof of attendance as professional development, you can request an attendance certificate through the Greenlight Guru Academy. You can find instructions on the Virtual Summit website or in the follow-up email that we'll send out here shortly after today's presentation as well. This session is going to run for about 45 minutes to an hour here, so if any questions come up throughout the presentation, please ask in the Q&A or the chat option feature that you're going to find on the right-hand side, and we'll get to as many of those questions as we can towards the end of our discussion here today. So now to jump into the heart of today's topic, which is the Asia Pacific medical device markets that are growing quite quickly. In this session, we have 3 experts in the region who are sitting down with us today to discuss the current regulatory landscape as well as the forecast. Before we jump into our questions here, I would love if we could start off with some introductions. So Pierre, I will start with you. If you could please tell us a little bit about yourself, your background, your current company, and the role that you're fulfilling, that would be fantastic.
Cool. Thank you very much, Laura. Thank you, and good evening, good morning, everyone. So Pierre is a French name. Obviously, I'm French. I've never worked with medical devices in France. I did a little bit of quality work in the nuclear energy domain, but then I discovered medical devices in New Zealand, actually working on neonatal brain monitoring for a small company called Brain Instruments. The company is now dissolved, unfortunately. I've then moved to Australia, and I've been working in Australia in sleep monitoring, sleep apnea treatment. I've worked also in Colorado in the US. I'm now back in Australia, so in Sydney, where I'm talking from, and running my own company called Diapason Consulting. Diapason means tuning fork in French, concept of harmonization, which will probably talk to a lot of you. I'm also a musician, which is why I chose this symbol and this name for the company. And what I do principally is to help entrepreneurs, startup creators, innovators, inventors, lots of them being doctors or academics who really want to start in this field. And I'm really trying to help them with everything, the regulations, the quality system, design control, risk management, and how to navigate all that. I have a little bit of experience with regulation and quality and commercialization in the Apac area, but probably not as much as the other panelists. So I'm quite excited to learn from them as well. And I think we're gonna grab this opportunity to introduce another one of them. Thank you, Laura.
Absolutely wonderful. Thank you so much. And thank you for joining us. Andrew C., would you mind introducing yourself as well?
Morning, everybody, or evening, everybody. My name is Andrew C., and I have been in the medical device industry for the last, I would say, 38 years. Okay, I went back a long way. I worked with a company in Singapore called Baxter Singapore. And then after that, I moved to Thailand for 5 years, okay, working with a company called Candle, which is now called Covidien Thailand. And then they changed the name again to Cardinal Health Thailand, all right? Then the following 2 years with them, I went to a company, a Japanese and a Thai joint venture called Thai Otsuka, and they are making solutions. Okay, so I'm always in the infusion therapy, arena. Okay, so Baxter is making infusion sets. Thai Otsuka is making solutions and all that kind of thing. I came back to Singapore, after another 3 years in China. becoming the general manager of a big American company. We are making medical tubing, medical films, and all different kinds of medical components, for the medical industries. Okay, so a background of 38 years working from discipline of production, QA manager, R&D manager, and then general manager. So now I came back to Singapore in 2010 and started my own company, MediPro Consultancy. The reason why is because there are a lot of MedTech companies in Singapore, and then I'm helping them now, because they are affiliated to A-STARS, National University of Singapore, National Technological University, and also all our hospital. I'm currently working with National University Hospital and National University of Singapore with a very top, surgeon in Singapore. Okay, and he has about probably a lot of projects. When the doctors, come and talk to me, they have catheters, they have heart valves, they have, you name it, all kinds of devices. And I'm the quality consultant right now, bringing the market from raw materials to processing to, all the way to sterilization and then out into the market. So, and also I am very experienced in regulatory affairs in the region. I speak 5 languages, of the Asian language. Okay, that's my background, 38 years in the field. All right.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. We certainly look forward to your expertise as we go through today's presentation. And last but certainly not least, Andrew Wu, if you wouldn't mind introducing yourself as well, that would be great.
Of course. Thanks for inviting me here. It's a pleasure to be among the veteran panelists here. I'm very excited about the conversation that we're going to have. So I'm Andrew Wu, the General Manager of Root Quality System Taiwan branch. Our headquarters is actually based in Atlanta, USA, and we recently celebrated our 10th year anniversary since its establishment in 2012. So I have a background in biomedical engineering and computer science, just to study and work in the States for about 10 years. Before joining RUC, I served as engineering manager for multiple startups, working on product in the interventional neurology space and cardiology space, and commercialized a few 510(k) products, including developing devices local in Taiwan and imported to US. Also imported to US and China and a few other Asian countries, also imported US devices to various Asian countries as well. So I'd like to briefly talk about the mission that RQS intend to achieve. Just like Pierre and Andrew were saying, a lot of our clients have wanted to establish internal processes that relates to the overarching quality system management framework, right, which govern engineering development, regulatory strategy, clinical validation, just to name a few. We provide hands-on support to identify potential process gaps, provide remediation supports, engage in the actual remediation efforts, and we can also represent you during regulatory submission and audits. And we have about 30 engineering consultants with broad exposure to various product profile and commercialization experiences across various demographic region. In the branch office, our focus is on software as medical devices, just like my educational background. So we are pretty experienced in medical imaging space and a few other digital health applications. So we do look forward to any provocative conversation with the panelists and the rest of the attendees. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. I can say I've seen some of the names that are joining us for today. I do know some of them are software as a medical device and looking to break into this market. So I know your knowledge around that is going to be great and wonderful to help them as well. Perfect. Well, thank you all so much for the wonderful introductions. To not keep everyone waiting, I would love to go ahead and jump into some of our questions for today. The first one being, would someone mind giving us just kind of a summary of the current regulatory landscape that you're seeing specifically within the APAC region? So that can be from a SAMHSA specific point of view, but also just some general medical device point of view. Whomever would like to start. No, it's always the fun. Who gets to go first?
I can start. Besides being with the university, I'm also a trainer. I'm a trainer with BSI and also TUV. So okay, so I provide training in 13485, okay, 14971, okay, 10993, and all the different types of methods of sterilization, steam, gamma, liquid sterilization for animal tissues, and all those things. So basically that is my field. So when I'm engaged, mostly is on 1345 expect. So I cover all the 8-clause system, working from with all the different companies, starting there, from level 1 document, all the quality manuals, their quality objective, and that. So I start with all those documents, and then going to the raw materials, and all that kind of thing. So raw materials testing and all that, get them all together, get the process right, get their process validated in IQ, OQ, PQ form, and then the bioburden checks and also the sterility testing, so the whole bit. So once you get all that in, in compliance to all the, standards, then you have to pass them through HSA. HSA is a regulatory authority in Singapore here, okay? And then HSA publish a lot of GN guidelines where you have to follow, and to comply with. And I must say Singapore is very advanced because we compile the ASEAN Medical Device Directive. Okay, and this medical device directive, in the ASEAN region, cover 10 countries: Vietnam, Philippines, Malaysia, Singapore, Thailand, Myanmar, Cambodia, Indonesia, Laos, and Brunei. Okay, so this is my area. Okay, so normally I got a question from all this ASEAN region because of Singapore being the platform, springing board to all these 10 countries.
Wonderful. That does kind of answer. So one of the questions we had come in before today was around, so within the US, at least we have the FDA, we have, you see MDSAP pop up a lot of places, which does include Japan and Australia. So a big question that we're seeing is what other sort of groupings are you seeing that are going to help you branch into multiple of those markets at the same time? So it sounds like the MDD that you were discussing, that is going to be a big one to come into play. Pierre or Andrew, did you either have anything else that you wanted to add as well?
Yeah, I can add on top of the Asian Medical Directive. I'm sure the audiences might be aware that there is actually a technical file format, or we call common submission dossier format that you can leverage. It is a template basically that you can try to translate all your technical file submission elsewhere in any other region and into this standardized format. And the advantage of using that is a lot of Asian countries regulatory authority actually are very familiar with it. So whenever you have communication with them about whether you have translated the technical artifact or documentation properly, I think that's a great way to start to save a lot of time and to standardize the process. I think that's one. And I would like to circle back on the IMDRF and the SAP effort. I think it was a great success overall since 2012, since the pilot program started, and then later, come into a full steam program. And I think the Global Harmonized Task Force, which formerly now called MDRF, is really a organization that Asian countries look up to. So a lot of the medical directive, including classification and a few other regulations, are in fact very familiar with IMDR framework. So I think there is a very high likelihood where the Asian country would be leveraging a lot of the IMDR framework going forward in terms of establishing their existing regulation locally. Thanks.
Absolutely. Pierre, did you have any additional comments you would like to add?
I don't think I could add anything to this high quality content we are hearing already. I may ask a question actually to both Andrews, because obviously you are very knowledgeable of this Asian framework. And is it going to be or become an official member of the IMDRF? Is there something happening in that sense, or are they just going to follow the lead from the IMDRF? Are you aware of anything?
Actually, Singapore is already an MDRF member, and then
Okay.
all right. So some of these countries more advanced, like countries like English-speaking countries, they're already member. All right. So what we want to do is that, we have taken the MDR, the essential requirements, and put them into our, dossier requirements that you have to fill up the essential, principles, under a guidance document in HSA called GN16, and you have to comply it, all that, and you've got to give the marketing information and all your, intended use and everything, on your CSDT, and then submit that, into HSA, one of the regulatory bodies, in order to get your product approved, to be distributed in Singapore or the region. So, but then is one thing good is that because all the 10 countries follow, the ASEAN Medical Device Directive. So if you submit to one country, the affiliation country, you can use the same thing. Okay, quite easy.
Wonderful. Kind of in line with that discussion, we did have a question that comes in, especially with doing that technical file into the different countries as well. We had a question come in from Jan asking which countries accept submissions in English, or do they need to work with a translator to help make it into the appropriate language? Have any of you had experience?
Okay, what you need to do in all the 10 countries in the ASEAN region is that you have to appoint a local representative. Okay, and then the local representative will take all your documents in English and then translate them to the local language. Okay, that means you need a local rep to do that, all right. And then what you do, you have to go through this agent, give him the fees, they will submit, to the regulatory bodies in that country. Okay, I'll tell you a little bit of, the reference. In Vietnam, they call it Department of Medical Equipment and Health Works. In Philippines, it's called FDA. Thailand is FDA. Myanmar is FDA. But then when you go to Malaysia, it's the Medical Device Authority. Singapore is Health Science Authority. Okay, Cambodia is Department of, Drug and Food. Indonesia is National Agency of Drug and Food Control. Laos is Food and Drug Department, and Brunei is Ministry of Health. You can see all different kinds of terminology. All right. So I'm sure, China is known as National Medical Products Administration right now. It was formerly called, the China FDA. So they want to change the name unique, for all the regulatory bodies. So you have to know, you have to have a local agent working with those bodies. It's better that way.
Absolutely, and that is a rep for each country.
Correct.
Yes.
Yep.
Perfect. Wonderful. Thank you all so much. Our next question here, I would love to have each of you answer this. Pierre, we can start with you, but we are asking, so a lot of the companies that I've worked with, or a lot of companies joining us today, are startups who are just starting to branch into the regulatory field. So I would love to know from each of your perspectives, depending on the areas that you're in, the regions that you're in, what would be a recommendation for somebody who is just starting out? What is step one that they need to take? And what advice would you give them if they are just starting the regulatory path in Australia or New Zealand, for example, for Pierre?
First pass, I would say, is to educate yourself. The myth that you can outsource compliance is dead. No one is thinking that way anymore. You need really to bring compliance as part of your culture, and then you would definitely need outsource expertise to help you navigate that. But you can't delegate this responsibility, and the MDR and all the other regulation make it very clear that you need the person responsible, whatever the name is, depending on the regulation, to be part of your management team. And that's really the advice I give to founders. Don't fall into the trap of buying the compliance as a service model when someone can sell you a pre-validated quality system and you pay whatever 6-figure numbers and you have guaranteed compliance at the end. Because even if that were to work, compliance at D-Day, you won't have it at D+1 if you don't understand what it means. So it's really this concept of education. And of course, I tell people, come to me and I can give you the first step of this education and then branch you towards other experts. And there's a lot of other good sources of education. Greenlight Guru videos are great as well. for a first level, but then you need the discussion, you need the personalization, and all that will go with a one-to-one consultant or a small company consulting firm to help you. That would be definitely my number one advice. Educate yourself and understand the big lines, because it also helps for the future. Now, regulation is a living thing. With digital health, AI, and all that, it's gonna evolve faster and faster. So you not only need to learn how regulations are today, but you need to learn what they will be in 2 years, in 5 years time, because development cycles are long for medical devices, and you need to be compliant today and in 5 years time.
Absolutely. So not only advocating and working for yourself now, but planning for the future.
Exactly.
Absolutely. Wonderful. Andrew C., would you also like to chime in on kind of what your biggest tip of advice is initially?
Okay. I've been working in these rounds for the last 30 years, and I always, always stress, and important that is that you must have a team, a steering committee team, like an ISO 13485 team together. If you want to start manufacturing, you must have the 5 pillars, all done, like the purchasing, raw materials, quality control, production, and logistics. All this, you must have them, chairing each kind of block, So then you start writing your document. Logistic document, purchasing, purchasing documents, production, production documents, QA quality, you have to do incoming, in process, final inspection with the relevant standards to the kind of medical device you're manufacturing. Okay, very important. So what you do is that you do a search of all the standards in the field and then find out which are the standards that are relevant to your device. Okay, whether it's a class B or class C, because in Singapore we call them, the class 1 or class A. Okay, and then the 2A we call them B. All right. And then 2B, we call them C, okay? And then class 3, we call them D, okay? If you are a class D producer, you have to really work very tough, because you have to go through the whole, biocompatibility, which is all the testing there and all that kind of thing. Like for me, the heart valve, you literally have to do everything and must not let any stone unturned. You've got to make sure the animal's tissues is right, they comply to TSB, BSE, and then, you must buy this tissue from a GBR 1 country and that kind of thing. This is just an example, okay? Then you start writing all the material specs, put them all together, and then say, and then you must start qualifying vendors and getting them into your approved vendor list. You can only buy from approved vendors, okay? You can't buy from somebody outside your AVL. Okay, very important. Now, once you get that all done, start streamlining all your procedures, all right? How you put the things together, how you stitch the valve together, how you put them into, solutions, what you have detox solutions, then you have, anti-calcification solution, then you go to the final liquid sterilization solution. So all this has to be documented. Then you have your shelf life studies, and then your sterility studies, your validation studies. Okay, all this got to come together. And when you put them all this together, start up, and to write your device history file in your design control. Get your device history file done. Then you have to have the user requirement, all your, design inputs, your design outputs, your design review, and then your V&V, okay? Then you come to design transfer to production, all right? You get that all done, all right? Then when you get that all done, get all the testing right and all that. And if you have class 3, then you have the clinicals, okay? You have to, get people sign on into your clinicals, do your first in man, then after that, a group of maybe 15, then go to 100, and you slowly get that data inside, all your documentation. Then you're ready for, to submit this document to your regulatory authorities. Okay, sorry, it's a long-winded process, but you got to do it, all right?
You do, but absolutely first place to start is identifying which class you think your product's going to be in and working towards 13485 or something to get your quality system in place, because everything you mentioned will fall back under that quality system. So it's good to have that in place.
That's why I always say that there's no single hero. There's always has to be a team. And it's the teamwork that get you through, very important, okay? There's no single hero. I try to do it in a small company it's impossible for a class 3 product, It's just that the duration get much longer if your team is small.
Yes. I always laugh though, you should always hug your document control because everything you described goes back to documents. So they always have a lot to do as well. Perfect. Wonderful.
Yeah, correct.
Wonderful. Andrew, I would love to get your perspective. I know you have worked in multiple different areas, multiple different industries. I would love both kind of a medical device perspective and a SAMHSA perspective, as far as, I'll let you take it away.
Absolutely. I think, both of the panelists mentioned very critical point from the ground up, and I'll approach it from the top-down approach. Considering many U.S. companies intend to expand to foreign market with constraint on timeline and cost structure, right? So I think there are 3 critical factors that I would like to just simplify this. So first is what type of existing certificate that you can leverage from reference countries, right? For instance, if you already have a 510K cleared by the FDA, or you have MDR, MDD in the past, how do you leverage those existing certification to get to certain market faster, right? Because there are options of a bridge or expedited option to reduce the time of review and also reduce the cost for review as well, right? So, and on top of that, I think it is absolutely important for a SAMHSA company to consider this option, because from my understanding, other than Singapore, China, and Australia, many other Asian countries do not have very established SAMHSA regulations. So they need to rely a lot on the existing certification elsewhere as a trustworthy source to establish their confidence on the device that you're importing. So I think that's just a very easy to obtain strategy for many SAMHSA companies, and that's kind of the top question that we'll be asking them about. And the second factor of it is just cost, right? So for instance, the counterpart of a pre-submission, there is a counterpart of pre-submission in Japan, right, and in China. However, the cost structure for doing a pre-submission is very high in Japan. For instance, if you want to talk about clinical evaluation or a clinical study consultation, it's a 2-hour meeting. Each of them would cost 10 grand US dollars. So that's pre-sub in US is free. So considering that, it's a drastic cost, expense on top of it. And in addition, if you're entering China market, you have to contract certain NMDA local, test labs, or you have to establish certain GLP requirement at your own laboratory in order to certify as yourself as a self-testing laboratory. However, that's a lot of time and cost associated with that. So if you want to enter China market, which is a lucrative market for sure, but there are going to be a lot of upfront costs associated with it, right? And lastly, just time, review time. For instance, if you want to go into South Korea, they actually would visit your local manufacturing site for site inspection. They do that. They don't just review your manufacturing procedure and validation records and call it a day. They actually would visit you and do a full-on audit. So that actually take a lot of time. And like I said, NMDA local testing requirement, it's another thing. Also, if you want to enter a certain market, require local clinical data, then the planning associated with it, how do you get KOL in place and really get through multiple IRB approval at local hospitals? And you have to pull, through a lot of connections to get it going, right? So I think there are just various factors, but I would like to emphasize that from our experience, leveraging the reference country certification is actually a very, very important thing to think about, at least initially.
Wonderful. You are ahead of the game with another question we had already had that came through asking what were some ways you could help expedite that process. And so absolutely using those similar ones or those expedited processes, that's fantastic information. That's going to help a lot of our customers I know that we have on the call with us today. So wonderful. Thank you. Perfect.
Sure.
Well, to jump into another area for today. So Pierre, you touched on this a little bit earlier when you were talking about kind of planning for that future. Is what changes are you seeing or what changes do you think you're going to expect? So I know with the FDA, they'll do mid-year updates. I'll get to sit in and listen on just getting some touch points on what we think is going to come in the future here. But is there any insight that any of you are able to give us into what changes you're expecting to see here in the future with the APAC regulations?
Yes, I won't talk for the Asian party because definitely I don't have the knowledge that the two Andrews have in that space. But for Australia, definitely change will be coming for everything that is digital. Andrew Wu mentioned SAMD, and you mentioned Australia as being a country with established regulation for SAMD. I'd like to mitigate that a little bit. Established, yes and no. Yes, the regulation has been in place. I think they've been voted, the last one in 2018, but were put in place in 21 because of the COVID have been pushed a year. And still to date, there's many companies that are out there with apps and SAMD applications that are a medical device. And the manufacturers themselves don't know it's a medical device because there's such a long history of a device is something you can touch that people don't know. And when they eventually learn that it's actually a device, there's a phase of denial. Like, no, I don't want to go there. It's too expensive. It's too complex. I don't want to do that. And then comes the realization that they have to do it, but it's long and they need to raise funds for that. And the Australian regulators, the TGA, is working with that, which is a tough challenge for them because they can't afford to put everyone out of business and they don't have means to do that either. And that's not their role. Their role is to make sure citizens and the public have access to safe technology, not to pull everything out of the market. So it's a very challenging environment where the regulators are trying to help the industry step into this new regulated world. That's a lot of challenge for consultants as well. For new entrepreneurs into that space, is the same. And with this concept of SAMD and digital health, it becomes more and more evident to many people that what needs to be regulated is not the technology itself, but the way the technology is used as part of a clinical process with doctors, with institutions, with insurance, with many things. You add to that the cybersecurity, you add to that IT that keeps evolving super fast, software that want to update every day. That's something a little bit like the Miller experiment when life started. You have chemicals and sparks and something will emerge out of that. I don't know what it is yet, but I don't believe the current statu quo, the current framework on which everything is based, will be able to cope with this pace of innovation and this pace of breaking silos and regulated big health system, making sure health economics is optimized for everyone. So that's what I think we need to prepare for as well. That's why I was saying earlier, entrepreneurs need to be aware that those things will evolve. We can't be regulated software with class 1 and class 2A and class 2B and class 3. It doesn't make sense. It's like casting something into something that it's not meant to be. So that in a sense, that's a hope as well. Let's hope this domain will evolve and the regulator will be able to have a better grasp on this large health system and the whole system in which the technology is used for medical purpose.
Absolutely. Wonderful. Thank you so much. Andrew C. or Andrew Wu, did you also want to talk to what changes you think we're going to see here in the future?
Yeah, I can briefly add on to the SAMD piece. But my intention was to, to convey that these three countries have higher incentive and, at least some momentum of get that going. Didn't mean that it's established in any way. So sorry if I misspoke. And we have been working with, few Australian-based or New Zealand-based company want to commercialize in the US, in fact. And we do recognize that in the digital health space, and especially SAMD space, a lot of time, this overall strategy would be, considering their local regulatory authority would be looking at what they do in the US market. For instance, they have to identify certain predicate devices on the market. They have to explain to them what classification that FDA does agree with their proposal, during the eventual submission or pre-submission, and really do a very thorough comparison in terms of the technical differences, but also the implication of the risk and benefit profile underneath the clinical setting, like Pierre was mentioning. So I do agree that there's a gray area, many gray area, in fact, for many SAMD devices being used, in certain clinical settings. However, I would encourage, a foreign company who perhaps local regulatory authority haven't established a regulation for SAMD, please do consider looking at what FDA is doing in the past 3-4 years. And I think the Century Act revision and a few other guidance document that they published, I think is really clearing up at least a few critical spaces, such as clinical decision support, MDDS, and a few others. So at least in that area, it gives you a little bit more clarity, and you can certainly leverage the framework to establish a foothold and have a rationale, right? To really explain to your local regulatory authority. And on top of that, for developing SAMD, I would also encourage all the foreign countries try to look into IEC 604 standard. So this is the software development lifecycle standard. And I think it's a very, for development team and engineering manager, this is very easy to comprehend. However, the implementation of that is debatable in terms of the resource that you need to put in. However, I would say if you want to take this just step by step, I think that would be a good approach. Just looking at what you need to implement at the end of the day and try to put pieces together one at a time so that your engineering team would get used to it. And also see the value of it. You have to have your engineering team to buy in the process. And a lot of the quality assurance engineer who did not have software background, they're going to have a hard time extracting technical artifacts during the software development process. So it really comes down to who will be doing that. And unless your software development team knows the scope of those quality record, no one else will be able to do it unless you find a dedicated software quality assurance candidate on the market, which is definitely a hot commodity right now. And you're going to compete with many other companies trying to offer them a very good position. So I think that would just be my high-level suggestion. Look into this standard early on, and reach out to whoever have done this, and especially leverage US framework, at least have some understanding of it and take it back to your own regulatory authority. Thanks.
Absolutely, thank you. And I think that does go back to the advice speaking of earlier about being early and advocating for yourself and looking into those standards, or even bringing someone in, like you mentioned,
absolutely,
to be that person. So that is wonderful. Perfect. Well, Andrew C., I would also love to get your take here. I know with many different countries that we were speaking of before our webinar here started today, we were talking about your experience in different areas, different industries throughout the years here. I would love to get your experience on the different changes you've seen and what you kind of expect to see here in the future as well.
Okay, in Singapore here, because of the local universities, it's a big research center. The building that I'm in is actually in cancer research and also leukemia, and then besides, working in the cardiac lab, we have a lot of AI, and professors working on this AI and also 3D dimensional things, These are all new technology that's coming. That means before my professor goes in for heart surgery, they already have a 3D model of the heart and the diseased heart been already, 3D mapped out. So you actually, kind of tell your routine team how to go into the surgery, in a certain pattern that, okay, who will go in first, and then who will lay out, and then what to do, what kind of administration. So before the operation really, started, you actually have a 3B model that you have already exercised upon, So all this intelligence, and then because we are in the National University hospitals, we are doing so much of the scans, So all these scans, becomes our wealth, is all our data accumulation. So we are able to divide them into different groups and kind of like, let's say heart valve, there are 5 sizes from size, 28 all the way to 36. So we are building up all this data, to keep us, and then the thing is that right now we still have to yet, to have very good standards on AI, how to manage all this, a standard or a guideline to follow. These are all what we call future, of medical care. All right, that you can actually model, something and then pre-work on it, and then, and when you go into the operating theater, you know exactly what to do, all right? So these are what we call the forefront of the future medicine, all right? Medicine care and all that. So that's why it's quite interesting, going into the future, the next generation is going to see a lot of revolution in all this medical care, so regulation will definitely have to be changed, of course, all right? Okay, these are things I'm seeing right now in the university. And you can even command, an operating, bed right now, say, incline 30 degrees, voice recognition, and the operating bed basically just move, and all that. Okay, so that is what my professor, the heart surgeon, is designing. One of the top-notch heart operating theater in Singapore. So these are all future technology going to be put in.
Absolutely. And because of those future technologies, we have to have the regulations to be updated with them to adapt for all of those and take those into consideration as well. I always say if there's something you can always count on in life, it's the regulations changing. We've certainly seen that over the last couple of years throughout the world.
You can imagine a guy that, when I first started, making medical devices, I'm using 4x6 computer, Today, my goodness, the supercomputer is in how many terabytes? In those days when I started in the early 80s, we never think of this kind of technologies. But again, generation and generation change. So you see, standards have to go together, all right?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Wonderful. Okay, so we do have time here for one last question to be asked. Let me pull up our questions here. Perfect. So we have one that came in from Jen asking, is it easier to submit medical devices in China if you have established manufacturing in China? Also, why can't China use ISO standards that are up to date instead of using outdated ISO standards? So I believe this question would be best towards Andrew C. or Andrew Wu if you've had any experience with manufacturing in China. I know this one's a little bit more country specific, but I know it would certainly help a lot of customers that we have on the call today. Would either of you like to chime in?
Yeah, sure. I can briefly touch on it, but I'm sure Andrew C. have much more wealth than myself in that space. So I'll just touch on a few that I can think of. First, a foreign manufacturer, when you want to enter China market, Chinese government actually require you to have the certification at your own country. So for instance, if a Taiwanese-based manufacturer is commercializing our product in China, then we have to secure our own license in Taiwan first before exporting. So for some companies, that can be a hurdle because they don't intend to commercialize, in their own country, but they see elsewhere in a bigger market. So if you have a so-called manufacturing, or you want to set up a company there, a subsidiary, I think they could potentially be considered as to mitigate that requirement. And on top of that, obviously, if you have certain localization in the area, you will have much more access to kind of the NMPA certified testing facility, right? Like there's much more nearby, have much more connection to leverage. So presumably you can reduce a lot of time and effort on locating one. And local agents is another one. If you have someone there, obviously you can try to circumvent that as well. However, there's still, some of the requirement that you need to think about. For instance, the local testing. I don't believe you can use outdated ISO standards. I do believe the main reason why is because the way that you have to use the local standards, or not the harmonized standard elsewhere, is because the scope and the versions of those Chinese-based standard are different. So it's not a one-to-one comparison. It's maybe one-to-vary comparison or a fraction of it. So I don't believe you can leverage elsewhere standard to do that. However, I do believe that biocompatibility testing can be accepted if you have previously conducted ISO 10993 that have GLP requirement in place. So Andrew C, do you have anything? I'm sure you have a lot more experience than myself, and I look forward to hearing your perspective. Thanks.
Okay, when I'm in China, and working as a general manager, I know that I think they are very critical to your technical material and the draft production technical standards. Now, when you have all these ISO standards in China, they change it into what you call GB standard. They call 国标 GB standards, and the GB standard they comply to is actually sent to all their testing facilities. They are all in the big cities. That means in southern China, you'll be in Guangzhou, in central, you'll be in Shanghai, and then in the northern China, you'll be Beijing. Some of these established centers, they will want you to send your product to these centers to get equivalence, tests of what you have obtained in your country. And of course they want, if you have at least 2 of these approval. Like if you're in Australia, you got to have your TGA registration license. If you're in Canada, you have to have your Health Canada, and then Japan, you have to have your MHLW, which is the Ministry of Health, Labor, Welfare, certificate. US, your US FDA, or in the EU, you have to have the EU's EC certificates, and all that. So if you have 2 of these certificates, normally what you do is that you have a what you call a express route, because you got approval, 2 of this approval in your area. So they kind of will just want you to do the critical tests in China. When you conduct this type of test, you have to send it to the appointed laboratories. Get that testing all done, then they will check those documents, evaluate all your complete set of material and your certificates that you get from your original country. Then your local agents got to put all these documents submitted to the authorities, which is right now the Medical Device Association, in Beijing, get them all in, then submit it all in. When I'm there, last time, but of course, they only accept a certain number of products, like Class B, products, but then when you go to Class D, which is the, Class 3 products, then, they are very critical. You've got to have, the GB equivalence of, 10993 tested. You must have biocompatibility tested in locally in China.
Absolutely.
Right.
Wonderful. Well, thank you all so much. Unfortunately, that does wrap up our time that we have together today. I would like to thank all of you very sincerely for your time and your expertise today. I know I certainly learned a lot, and I know a lot of our customers who joined us in for today as well certainly learned a lot from you as well. Just as a reminder for anyone else that would like to join us, we have another great panel coming up here in about 10 minutes on the Central and South American regulations. So whether it is your morning like me or your evening like our panelists, grab a cup of coffee so that you can make it through the day here and join us for our next panel. But otherwise, once again, thank you three so much, very much. It was a great panel, lots of comments coming in saying the same, and we look forward to connecting again here in the future.